Human, please save my daughter from under the garbage pile. So the human dug through filth, and the sun was low over the scrap fields. Orange light cut across the mountains of garbage, casting long shadows between rusted beams and piles of broken machinery. The air stank of chemicals and sour decay. The wind carried bits of ash from a distant fire, fine gray flakes drifting through the trash like soft dust. Corn adjusted the strap of his tool bag across his shoulder, scanning the heaps for anything worth selling. He was in his early 30s, lean and strong from years of hard work. His short dark hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. A faint scar cut through the stubble on his jaw, a souvenir from a broken beam that fell too fast months ago. He had been scavenging the outskirts of this alien city for 3 years. He wasn't born here, but he'd ended up here after the mining run on Vora. 9 fell apart, and his crew scattered. He'd bought this old freighter, patched it together with scrap, and survived by hauling junk to the merchant districts. Every day, he searched for working power cores, salvageable circuit boards, anything that might buy him fuel and rations for another week. The alien city in the distance shimmered with dull neon light. Massive towers leaning against each other like drunks too tired to stand. Between the towers, dark alleys churned with gangs and low-tier smugglers. Out here in the trash, at least, Corin could keep away from trouble. He bent over an old industrial container, prying up the warped lid with a crowbar. The metal squealed as it shifted. Inside, scorched cables and melted panels. Nothing useful. He spat on the ground, frustration simmering in his gut. The days had grown lean lately. He needed better salvage, or he wouldn't be able to trade for fuel cells. His ship's generator was failing, and without that ship, he had nothing. As he moved away, he paused. A faint sound cut through the creaking trash. He heard coughing first, thin and wet. Then a voice, raw and desperate. Please help someone. He scanned the piles. Trash heaps shifted all the time. People disappeared in them. Usually he ignored voices like that. Too often they were bait for a mugging or worse. But this one was different. There was real panic there, a trembling edge that sliced past his instinct to keep moving. Corin stepped forward, boots sinking in his sludge. He saw a flash of blue skin, a figure clawing at a half-collapsed pile of metal sheets. Long crimson hair clung to the woman's dirty face. Her arms bled from small cuts where rust had torn them open. She looked up, eyes wide, shining teal irises reflecting the dying sunlight. Please, she said, breath ragged. My daughter, she's under here. I can't get her out. He didn't speak. He pushed past her, gripped the edge of the metal slab she had been pulling at. It was heavier than it looked. His muscles strained, hands slipping on the corroded surface. He adjusted his stance, planted his boots, and pulled harder. The sheet shifted with a groan, rust flaking in thick red clouds. A faint whimper came from beneath. Corin shoved the slab aside, revealing a small pit under the garbage. A child lay there, half buried under debris, skin pale blue, hair the same crimson shade as the woman's. She was coughing weakly, tears cutting streaks through grime on her cheeks. The woman lunged forward, pulling the child free. The little girl clung to her mother's neck, body trembling, breath thin and fast. Corin stepped back, catching his breath. His arms ached. Rust dust stuck to his sweat-slick forearms. He glanced at the woman, noticing now how thin she was. Her silvery dress was torn and stained, barely clinging to her small frame. Purple bruises covered her arms and legs. Corin's thoughts moved fast. Why was she here with a child? The garbage piles were dangerous. Metal shifted without warning, crushing anything beneath. He'd seen bodies pulled out days later, bloated and gray. You can't stay here, he said, voice flat but calm. These piles collapse. Get to my ship. It's close. She didn't answer, just held the child tighter, stumbling as she tried to stand. He grabbed her elbow, steadying her, steering her away from the heap. The girl whimpered, hiding her face against her mother's shoulder. They crossed the trash field, past half-buried drones and twisted metal arms sticking from the heaps like broken branches. The woman limped, barefoot, toes bleeding from sharp metal cuts. Corin felt a tight coil of anger in his chest. Who left a child in a place like this? His ship was old and battered, hull patched with mismatched metal plates. The ramp hissed open as he keyed the control on his wrist. The stale smell of engine grease drifted out into the night air. Inside, he said. She hesitated at the ramp, glancing behind her into the darkening trash field. Corin saw real fear in her eyes, the kind that came from living under constant threat. He didn't push her, just waited. After a second, she stepped forward. Inside, he led her to the small crew compartment he'd converted into a living space. A low cot sat against one wall, covered with thin blankets. A small heater glowed dull orange in the corner. He guided her to the cot. She sank onto it, clutching the girl so tight the child squeaked in pain. "Easy," he said, voice soft. "She's breathing. Let her rest." The woman blinked fast, tears smudging streaks through grime on her cheeks. Her hands shook as she brushed hair back from the child's forehead. Corin fetched a metal flask of water, handed it to her. Slow sips. If she gulps, she'll choke. She took it with trembling hands, tipping it carefully against the girl's cracked lips. The child drank in tiny swallows, chest hitching. Corin squatted beside them, studying the woman's face. Her skin had a faint shimmer under the grime, a natural luminescence common to some city-dwelling species he'd seen. Her crimson hair stuck to her cheeks in dirty strands. Her eyes never left the child. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lyra," she whispered, voice raw. And the girl. "Zara," she said, brushing the child hair back again. "Why were you out there?" She hesitated. "He makes us. We dig. He takes everything. If we bring nothing, he hurts us." Corin felt heat bloom in his chest. He kept his voice level. "Your mate." She nodded once, eyes darting away. "If I don't bring scrap, She touched the bruise on her arm without seeming to notice. "Zara. He says he'll hurt her too." Corin took a slow breath. He felt the familiar twinge in his stomach, the one that said, "Don't get involved, don't start caring, just survive." He'd ignored it before and almost died. But looking at the child's filthy, trembling frame, he couldn't swallow it down this time. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "You need rest. Tomorrow, we figure out something else." She looked up at him, eyes shining in the dim glow of the heater. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't know us. Why help?" Corin stood, glancing at the hatchway. Outside, the wind rattled loose metal, trash shifting with the scrape of rust on rust. He didn't answer her question. "Eat," he said instead. He fetched a can of protein paste from a crate, twisting off the lid, handing it to her. She took it with shaking hands, feeding the girl first, then taking a small bite herself. Corin leaned against the bulkhead, watching them. He remembered the first time he came to this city, a kid barely out of his teens, fresh off a mining rig, thinking he could find honest work. The city had chewed him up, taught him quick how pointless that dream was. Nobody helped anyone here. You watch your own back, or you didn't last. But he couldn't stand there and watch a mother feed her starving child with hands bruised and bleeding. Maybe that made him weak. Maybe it meant he'd be the next one, chewed up and spat out. But he couldn't stop himself. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch." She nodded, eyes heavy with exhaustion, curling protectively around Zara. Corin stayed at the door, hand resting on the old pulse pistol at his hip, staring into the dark corridor beyond. He didn't trust this city not to send something else their way tonight. As the heater's glow flickered against the metal walls, Corin thought of the man who beat them. He pictured him lounging in some filthy hovel, waiting for Lyra to bring scraps home. His jaw clenched. If the bastard came here tonight, Corin wouldn't hesitate. He'd kill to protect them. He knew that as sure as he knew the ache in his arms from lifting that beam. The ship creaked around him. Lyra breathed slow now. The girl curled against her chest. For tonight, they were safe. He would keep them that way. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he wouldn't leave them to die in the trash. Not again. Not like the others he'd seen vanish in the piles. Not this time. Corin barely slept. He stayed by the door, one hand resting on the grip of his old pulse pistol, eyes fixed on the dark hallway. The ship creaked as the wind pushed trash and debris against the hull. Somewhere outside, a muffled clang echoed through the empty yard. Metal on metal, probably just shifting piles in the night, but he didn't relax. His muscles ached from pulling the beam off the child, but his mind stayed sharp, every breath shallow and measured. He didn't know why he cared this much. He'd told himself over the years not to. He'd seen dozens of families scavenge the trash fields, watch them vanish when the piles collapsed or when gangs swept in and took everything they had. He never got involved. He traded salvage for credits, fixed what he could, kept the ship running. That was survival. That was the rule. But the way the woman looked at him, clutching her child, eyes swollen with exhaustion and fear, he couldn't look away from that. Something about them gnawed at him. Maybe he was tired of watching people break apart and pretending it didn't matter. Maybe he'd been alone too long. Hours passed. The glow of the old heater dimmed. Lyra shifted in her sleep, arms tightening around the child. Zara whimpered once, small fingers clutching at her mother's torn dress. Corin forced himself to stay still, eyes scanning the corridor, listening for anything out of place. Just before dawn, he heard faint scraping at the cargo ramp. He slipped into the hallway, moving quiet as he could, pulse pounding in his ears. He reached the cockpit, glanced at the exterior monitor. Two figures in the dark outside, tall, shoulders hunched under heavy jackets. Scavengers. Maybe thieves. Maybe worse. Corin flicked the comm to silent. Watched them peer up at the hull, poking at seams and weld lines. He let them circle, waited until they moved out of sight near the stern hatch. Then he opened the cockpit door, padded back to the cargo bay, checking on Lyra and Zara, still asleep. He thumbed the safety on his pistol, moved toward the stern. One of the men started prying at a panel with a crowbar. Corin slipped around the corner, leveled the gun at the man's head, and spoke low. "Drop it." The man froze, shoulders tensing. The second man swung around from the shadows, knife raised. Corin fired. The pulse blast hit the knife, sending it spinning into the dark. He aimed again. "I said drop it." They backed away, hands raised. Young, ragged, eyes wild from too many nights on the streets. Corin stepped forward, kicking the crowbar out of reach. "Tell your friends," Corin said, voice flat, gun steady. "This ship is mine. You come back, you lose your hands. Go." They ran. He waited until the scuffling footsteps vanished into the trash piles, then let out a slow breath. His hands trembled faintly as the adrenaline bled off. He holstered the pistol and checked the hull. The panel was dented but intact. Corin moved back into the cargo bay. Lyra was awake now, eyes wide, clutching Zara. She looked like a trapped animal, waiting for a blow. "It's fine," Corin said. "Just thieves. They're gone." She swallowed, voice small. "They follow us, sometimes in the piles. They steal what we find. If we fight back, they call others." Corin nodded once. He grabbed a small welding kit from a shelf, started sealing the dented seam where the scavenger had pried. Sparks hissed into the dim air, lighting the room in brief flashes. "You don't have to go back out there," he said. "Not anymore." Lyra hesitated. "He'll come for us. If we don't bring him scraps." Corin stopped welding, glanced back at her. "Who is he exactly?" She looked away, lips tight. "His name is RYC. He used to work the docks. When a factory shut down, he stopped working. Started drinking. Got mean. If we come back with nothing, he punishes us. Says we're useless if we don't feed him." Corin felt anger rise in his chest. He'd seen men like RYC before. Parasites, leeches feeding on fear. They never changed. He also knew the city didn't care. Authorities rarely patrolled the outskirts. The old laws meant nothing. Out here, the strong took what they wanted. Why stay with him? Corin asked, keeping his voice low. Lyra glanced at Zara, brushing dirt from the child's cheek with trembling fingers. "I tried to leave once. He found us. He said he'd kill me if I ran again. He said he'd break her legs so she couldn't run either." Corin gripped the welder tighter, knuckles white. He forced himself to focus on the seam, finishing the patch. He killed the arc, set the tool aside. "You're safe here," he said. "I won't let him touch you." Lyra watched him, eyes darting over his scarred hands, the old lines around his tired eyes. She looked like she wanted to believe him, but couldn't let herself. "Why help us?" she asked again, softer this time. Corin didn't have a clean answer. Maybe he saw something of himself in the kid, hiding under trash, gasping for breath. Maybe he was just tired of walking past bodies in the piles. Maybe he didn't want to be alone anymore. "Because someone has to," he said. Silence filled the ship. Outside, the wind hissed over metal. Lyra drew Zara closer, pressing a kiss to the child's dirty forehead. Corin checked the charge on his pistol, making sure the power cell was fresh. He didn't know if RYC would come looking. But if he did, Corin wouldn't run. He'd spent too many years turning his back on other people's pain. This time, he'd stand his ground. He dug a cracked tin cup from a crate, filled it with stale water, handed it to Lyra. "It's not much," he said, "but drink. You need your strength." She took it with both hands, drank in small, careful sips. Corin noticed her arms were covered in faint scars, some old, some fresher. He wondered how many beatings she'd survived. He wondered how many nights she lay awake, clutching Zara, praying they wouldn't starve or be caught by thugs in the piles. "You worked the trash fields long?" he asked. 3 cycles, Lyra said. "He forced me out there after the factory shut. He said the city owed him more. But he never goes himself. He waits, drinks, threatens." Corin nodded. He remembered when the factories closed, the news broadcast showing lines of alien workers screaming at shuttered gates while patrol drones hovered overhead. The government said new industries would come. They never did. The city kept rotting. The gangs grew. More scavengers appeared every year, desperate, hungry, dying in the shadows of towers. "I used to work on a mining crew," Corin said. "Thought I'd save enough to buy my own ship, start something clean. Didn't happen. So now I scrape by. Same as everyone else." Lyra's voice was faint. "You're better than the others." Corin almost laughed at that. But he didn't. He couldn't afford to believe he was better than anyone. The difference was he hadn't let the rot inside him. Not yet. He checked the cargo hold seals one more time, then glanced at Lyra. "Rest," he said. "We'll figure this out tomorrow." She nodded, hugging Zara closer. The child slept now, tiny chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. Corin moved into the cockpit, setting the external sensors to active scan. He leaned back in the worn pilot's chair, staring out the viewport at the trash planes. If RYC came, Corin would be ready. He wouldn't lose them to the piles. Not tonight. Corin stayed in the cockpit until the sun scraped over the distant towers, casting thin orange light across the trash fields. The scanner showed nothing but the shifting piles outside, small heat blips that were probably rodents or old servos half buried and glitching. He rubbed grit from his eyes with the back of his hand, feeling every hour of the long night in his stiff shoulders and raw throat. He hadn't slept. He didn't trust the quiet to last. When he finally stepped into the cargo bay, Lyra was awake, sitting cross-legged on the cot with Zara curled against her. She was combing the girl's tangled hair with her fingers, trying to pull out bits of trash and old metal shavings. She glanced up when she heard him, eyes rimmed red but steady. "Thank you," she said, voice rough. "For last night. For everything." Corin nodded. He glanced at the child. "How's she doing?" Lyra swallowed. "She's hungry, but breathing easier." He fetched a sealed ration pack from a crate, tore it open, handed it to her. "It's processed paste, but it'll keep her on her feet." Lyra fed the child with careful hands, small spoonfuls at a time. Zara's eyes flicked between Corin and her mother, wary but curious. Corin crouched near them, studying the girl's small frame, the bruises along her skinny arms, the faint scars on her knees. He tried not to show how angry that made him. "Where did you come from before all this?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. Lyra's shoulders tensed. She glanced at Zara, then back at Corin. "I grew up in the lower districts. My father worked waste processing before the factories closed. He died when I was 12. My mother disappeared into the slums. I never found her. And RYC?" Corin pressed gently. "He was older. Worked the docks. He was strong, had connections back then. I thought he'd protect me." She let out a hollow breath. "I was wrong. The gangs took over the docks." He stopped working, started gambling, drinking. He said I owed him for taking me in. Corin studied her face. The old bruises, the sunken cheeks, the small shiver in her hands, even now. He spoke carefully. You think he'll come here looking? She nodded. He has friends in the scavenger dens. They watch the trash fields. If we're seen, she trailed off, swallowing hard. Corin let the thought hang in the air. He knew the gangs that ran the slums. They didn't care about domestic fights. They cared about power, territory, fear. If RYC was small time, they'd leave him alone unless he made trouble. But even so, Corin couldn't count on the city authorities. They rarely patrolled the outskirts, and when they did, they didn't bother with family matters. He'd seen them drive past stabbings, beatings, even bodies in the street. The towers closer to the core got their protection. The rest of the city rotted alone. You ever think of leaving? Corin asked, surprising himself. Lyra looked at him with tired eyes. Where would I go? The planet's ports are locked tight unless you pay heavy fees. And the gangs run half the docks. He'd find us before we could buy a berth. Corin leaned back on his heels, considering. He had papers on file at the port, but they were flagged with unpaid fines. He'd been stopped once already by patrol drones, forced to bribe them with half his fuel stash just to keep his old freighter off the seizure list. If he tried to leave openly, they'd likely dock him again, or worse, confiscate the ship and leave them stranded. He thought of something Lyra had said, something that stuck in his head all night. You said RYC has connections. How deep? She hesitated. I don't know. He bragged. Once he ran errands for a gang boss near the old East Dock. He knows some smugglers, but I don't think they trust him anymore. He spends what Lily gets on drink and trash weapons. He talks tough, but he's nobody really. Corin nodded slowly. That was a relief in a way. It meant they weren't dealing with someone the gangs truly valued. If RYC came, he'd likely come alone, maybe with 1 or 2 drunken friends. That was something Corin could handle. Listen, Corin said, voice steady. I can't promise you safety forever, but for now, stay on the ship. Help me patch some of the old systems. In return, you get food, you get a bed, and you don't have to crawl through the trash piles anymore. Lyra blinked fast, holding Zara tighter. I don't want anything else, she whispered. Just somewhere he can't hurt us. Corin felt something loosen in his chest, the knot of tension that had been there since he first heard her call out for help under the garbage. He stood, glancing around the cluttered bay. You ever worked a ship before? She shook her head. I cleaned office towers once, but I can learn. Good, Corin said. I'll show you what to do. The engine room is a mess. Zara can stay here, rest. It's safer than dragging her out there again. Lyra helped Zara settle into the cot, feeding her the last of the ration pack. The child's eyes fluttered, exhaustion taking her back into sleep. Corin led Lyra through the narrow corridor into the engine room. The space was cramped, old conduits running across the ceiling like tangled roots. One wall was covered with half-finished repairs, patched wires, jury-rigged cooling pipes dripping with condensation. The main drive core rattled faintly, power conduits blinking erratic red along their length. Corin handed Lyra a rag and pointed at a row of old vent shafts streaked with grease. These need cleaning, or we'll have a fire next time I spin up full power. Be careful. Metal edges are sharp. She nodded, biting her lip, hands trembling slightly. But she took the rag, started scrubbing, moving with slow care. Corin watched her, checking the regulator valve on the core while glancing over at her now and then. He noticed how thin her arms were, the way her breath caught every time something clanged or sparked nearby. He wondered how long it had been since anyone had spoken to her without shouting, without threats. He focused on the regulator, tightening the seal with an old spanner. His mind churned quietly. If RYC came, he'd be ready. But part of him hated the idea of sitting and waiting. He'd never been good at waiting for trouble to come knocking. Lyra's voice broke the quiet. Why don't you leave this place? You have a ship. You could go anywhere. Corin hesitated. It was a fair question, one he'd heard in his own head countless nights. I tried once, he said. Got flagged by Port Authority. They wanted docking fees I couldn't pay. They threatened to impound the ship. So I stayed. Did small runs. Scraped by. Why not pay them? She asked softly. Corin tightened the bolt until it squealed. I've been cheated more times than I can count. Work a contract. They dock half your pay-for fees. Lose a cargo, you pay a fine. Survive, you're still in debt. I got tired of working for the same bastards who keep the gangs in power. Lyra scrubbed harder, hands smudged with black grime. You don't seem like someone who gives up, she said. Corin smirked faintly. I'm still here, aren't I? He checked the readout on the power cell, saw the needle shift into the green. Finally, some good news. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Let's finish cleaning this, he said. Then I'll show you how to flush the coolant lines. They worked in silence after that. Corin showed her how to handle the old panels, how to brace them so they wouldn't snap loose. He tried not to think of the trash fields outside, the looming towers in the distance, the man waiting somewhere for Lyra and Zara to return with scraps. But the thought stayed in the back of his skull like an itch he couldn't scratch. He knew this wasn't a permanent solution. Sooner or later, RYC would come looking, and Corin would be ready. What he didn't say, what he wouldn't let himself think about too hard, was the tiny flicker of hope he felt every time he looked at Lyra. The way she moved carefully in the tight engine room, the way she glanced at him with cautious trust. He hadn't let himself want anything real in years. But the thought was there, waiting, dangerous and soft. By the time they returned to the cargo bay, Zara was awake, sitting up on the cot, eyes bright with hunger. Corin handed her another ration pack, ruffling her hair gently as he passed. She flinched at the touch, then peeked up at him, confused but curious. It's okay, he said quietly. You're safe here. Lyra sat beside her, feeding her again. Corin watched them from the doorway, arms folded, mind running through possibilities. How to fix the ship faster, how to get off this rock without paying the crooked port authorities, how to protect these two for one more night. He didn't know the answers yet, but he was done turning away from people who needed help. This time he'd fight back. This time, he wouldn't let the city eat them alive. Corin barely slept that night. He lay on the narrow cot in the cockpit, staring at the dim ceiling panels streaked with grime and old heat damage, ears tuned to every creak of the ship's hull. Lyra and Zara rested in the cargo bay behind him, wrapped in the old thermal blankets he'd scavenged from a junk hauler years back. The silence of the trash field outside didn't comfort him. He knew silence here only meant something was watching, waiting. He checked the external scanners twice in the night, his pulse pistol never far from reach. Every time he glanced at the monitor and saw nothing but shifting piles and faint heat signatures. Probably stray animals. The tension in his shoulders only tightened. He hated waiting for trouble. He'd spent years moving constantly, staying ahead of gangs, corrupt patrols, and his own debts. But now he felt cornered, anchored by the two people sleeping just meters away. By dawn, a plan had begun to take shape in his head. He'd been nursing the idea for months in the back of his mind, leaving this planet for good, finding work on a frontier world where the big corporate patrols didn't reach, where the gangs had no foothold. The ports were locked down with tariffs and bribes, but there were smugglers who knew back routes, black market operators who would fake clearance codes for the right price. He'd never trusted them before, but now he had someone worth risking everything for. When the ship's inner lights flickered to life with a weak morning power surge, Corin got up, stretched the stiffness from his arms, and headed into the cargo bay. Lyra was already awake, brushing Zara's hair with her fingers. The child stared up at Corin with guarded eyes, clutching a torn scrap of blanket to her chest. Morning, Corin said. His voice was rough from disuse, but steady. You both sleep? Lyra nodded. She looked tired, but some of the terror in her face had faded, replaced by the wary determination of someone who'd survived too long to trust calm moments. Better than the street, she whispered. Corin pulled a can of nutrient paste from a crate, set it beside her. Eat. Then we need to talk. Lyra fed Zara first, then herself in small bites. Corin sat on an overturned crate across from them, elbows on his knees, watching them eat. His mind ticked through the details he'd learned in the past day. RYC's rumored connections, the gangs that control the docks, the bribes the port authorities demanded. He hated every moving piece of it, but he didn't see another choice. He spoke low so Zara wouldn't catch the worst of it. You said RYC has friends in the scavenger dens, but not real ties with the big gangs. That means he has no official backing, just thugs who follow him for scraps. Right? Lyra hesitated. Yes. He talks like he's important. But he's not. The gangs don't trust him. That helps us, Corin said. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice further. I've been thinking about leaving this place. Not just the trash fields, the planet. Going somewhere new. Lyra blinked fast. Off-world? That's impossible. The port, they never let anyone go without paying. I know, Corin said, but there are smugglers who slip ships out. I've never used them because they cheat you, and I couldn't afford the risk. But if we're going to stay ahead of RYC, we need to get far enough he can't follow. Lyra's hands trembled where they rested on Zara's back. He'll come looking, she whispered. He always finds me. Not if we move fast, Corin said. I know a few old contacts. Greedy bastards, but they'll work with me if I offer them enough scrap and components. Things they can't get easy. I have some stockpiled in the cargo hold. It's not much, but maybe enough to buy us a fake pass. If it works, we slip past the port checks before RYC even knows we're gone. Lyra's eyes darted to Zara, who had stopped eating and was staring at them both with wide, unblinking eyes. Corin softened his voice, looking at the girl. It's going to be okay, he said, forcing calm into his words. I won't let him hurt you again. I promise. Zara didn't respond, but her shoulders relaxed a fraction, her small fingers twisting the edge of the blanket in her lap. Corin stood and paced, his boots echoing faintly in the metal bay. If we do this, we have to move fast, he said. We'll need to clean the ship, patch the engine coils, load the scrap. I have a few contacts in the old marketplace. Maybe they can point me to a smuggler with an open slot. But the second word gets out we're looking for passage. RYC could hear about it. Lyra swallowed hard. What can I do? Help me get the ship ready, Corin said. He glanced at the kid. And keep her quiet, hidden. If any of RYC's watchers show up near the docks, we stay inside and bolt the hatch. We don't answer calls. We don't trust anyone. Lyra nodded slowly. He could see fear in her eyes, but also something harder beneath it. The spark of someone who had survived worse than this and was still standing. I'll do anything, she whispered. Corin believed her. He turned toward the storage racks along the hull, checking their small stash. Old power cells, partial engine cores, broken mech arms he could cannibalize for spare parts. It wasn't enough to buy a guaranteed berth off-world, but it might be enough to buy silence. Or time. Maybe that was all they needed. Why do you care so much? Lyra asked suddenly. Her voice wasn't accusing, just tired, raw with the kind of confusion only years of abuse and betrayal could breed. Why help us at all? You could walk away. Corin paused, staring at the heap of scrap. He hated the question because he didn't have an answer that would make sense to her, or to himself. Maybe it was because he'd seen enough dead kids in the trash fields to last 10 lifetimes. Maybe it was because he was sick of surviving for nothing, sick of running out the clock while the city rotted around him. Maybe it was just because he was lonely, and seeing them together made him remember he was still human, still had a choice. He turned back to her, voice quiet. Because no one helped me when I needed it, he said. I'm tired of living like that. Silence settled between them, heavy but not empty. Lyra nodded once, like she understood something important had been said, even if the words were small. Corin pointed at the wall panel near the main hatch. I'll start securing the seals. You clean the tool bench, sort anything we can sell. If we're going to do this, we have to be ready fast. Lyra moved to the bench, pulling on old work gloves, scraping grime and rust from the tools. Corin checked the hull seals, his mind racing through the steps ahead. Find the smuggler, secure the berth, keep the ship hidden from RYC's watchers until the moment they launched. And most of all, keep Lyra and Zara from panicking. Because panic killed more people than any gang boss in this city. He felt the old itch of fear at the back of his skull, the part of him that wanted to cut and run, vanish into the trash fields alone. But he'd made his choice. He wouldn't abandon them. He watched Lyra wipe rust from an old plasma cutter, her hands trembling but determined. He glanced at Zara, who was curling up on the cot with the empty ration pack clutched in her small hands, eyes half closed, but watching him, always watching. He forced a small nod, trying to reassure her. In his gut, Corin knew this wouldn't be easy. He'd seen smugglers betray entire families for a handful of credits. He'd watched ships get boarded by patrol drones the second they lifted off, all passengers dragged out screaming into the dirt. But he also knew something else. If they stayed, RYC would find them. He would drag them back into that hovel, beat Lyra bloody, hurt the child, break them until they were nothing. And Corin wasn't going to let that happen. Not this time. He slammed the panel shut, sealing the final hull seam with a hiss of locking pins. Then he looked at Lyra and spoke with quiet certainty. "We're getting out of here, one way or another." She swallowed, met his eyes, and nodded. No tears now, just resolve. Outside, the wind rattled the trash piles, sending a dull roar through the hull. Somewhere in the city, sirens wailed and then cut off abruptly. But inside the ship, the three of them moved like one unit, pushing through fear, exhaustion, and doubt with nothing but grim determination. For the first time in years, Corin felt alive, and he wasn't going to waste that feeling. Corin didn't sleep again that night. He stayed at the ship's main console, one ear tuned to the outer sensors while his eyes flicked over the display screen, checking fuel levels, power cell readings, and the ship's aging thrusters. Outside, the wind moaned through the towers, rattling loose panels that clanged and scraped like metal teeth gnawing on bone. By midday, he knew they were running out of time. One of his old contacts, an ex-smuggler named Tyreek, finally answered his coded message, crackling through the comm with static. "Slot just opened," Tyreek said, voice low and rushed. "I got a small window. Patrol's cycling shift at night. If you want out, you go tonight. I don't hold it for you. Understand?" Corin gripped the comm tighter, his voice even. "Understood. How much?" "Half your scrap stock," Tyreek said. "Rest of the payment once you're past orbit. If you can't pay, I bounce you off the dock. No free rides." Corin glanced at the stacked crates in the cargo hold. Stripped conduits, old regulator coils, the partial mech arm he'd scavenged last season. It was nearly everything he owned. If Tyreek double-crossed him, they'd have nothing left. But it was the only option. "Fine," Corin said. "We'll be there." "Good," Tyreek said and cut the line. Corin set the comm aside, exhaling slow. His gut burned with doubt, but he didn't let it show. He walked back into the cargo bay, where Lyra was fastening an old jacket around Zara's shoulders. The girl looked up at him, eyes wary but hopeful. "It's time," he said. Lyra swallowed hard. "Are you sure?" Corin nodded. "If we stay, he finds you. We wait any longer, we lose our slot. We move now." He showed her how to lock down the loose storage bins, told her to gather anything she wanted to take. There wasn't much. A torn blanket, a broken data tablet Zara sometimes scribbled on with a rusted stylus. Lyra tucked them into a frayed bag, then lifted Zara onto her hip. They moved through the narrow halls of the ship. Corin flicked on the old shield emitter, watching the power cells drop into the yellow. He didn't have enough charge to run both shields and weapons long if they were hit, but he'd take the extra layer of protection in the alleys over nothing. "Stay close," he told Lyra. "Don't stop for anyone. If we get split up, you run for the shipyard entrance." "Got it." Lyra nodded, jaw tight. "Got it." Corin lowered the ramp. The stink of the city washed in, hot metal, rotting trash, burnt oil from the refineries. They slipped into the shadows, weaving between piles of broken hull, plating, and old engine housings. The path to the shipyard cut through a narrow alley lined with neon signs sputtering in alien script. Rats skittered across their path, their pale eyes reflecting the dull glow of street lamps overhead. They reached the outer edge of the docks as dusk fell, purple clouds streaking the sky over the towers. Corin checked every shadow, every corner, scanning for RYC or any of his watchers. Nothing yet. He led them along the cracked pavement, ducking past a patrol drone that buzzed overhead, its scanning beam cutting bright white arcs across the street. He spotted Tyreek near Dock 9, leaning against a battered cargo loader. Tyreek was older now, hair thin and patchy, teeth yellow from too many stim sticks. His eyes flicked over Corin and the others with greedy calculation. "You brought the stuff?" Tyreek asked, voice low. Corin nodded, gesture behind him. "Load it in the ship. Take it, give us the passcodes, then we're done." Tyreek spat, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Don't rush me, Corin. You know how this works. I transfer your scrap to my hauler, then you get your exit vector." Corin's jaw tightened. "Fine, just move fast." Tyreek snapped his fingers. Two rough-looking men with old grav lifts trundled forward, pushing carts to Corin's ship. Lyra shifted closer to Corin, her eyes locked on Tyreek. "Can we trust him?" she whispered. "Trust isn't real out here," Corin murmured back. "We just hope he wants our stuff more than he wants to screw us." Tyreek's men loaded the scrap onto their carts, trundling it toward a rust-streaked freighter docked nearby. Tyreek watched them work, grinning. "You really going to run off with a pretty alien girl and her brat, Corin? Didn't think you were the charity type." Corin didn't look at him. "Just give me the codes." Tyreek's grin faded. He tapped a small comm device, clipped to his belt. Corin felt his wrist console buzz, a new flight path uploaded. He checked it quick, seeing the access vector flash green on the screen. It wasn't clean, but it was real. That was enough. "Pleasure doing business," Tyreek said, grabbing Corin's shoulder, leaning close. His breath smelled like burnt plastic. "Watch your back on the way out. RYC's been asking around the trash fields. Seems he's got a score to settle." Corin shrugged him off, fighting the surge of adrenaline rising in his chest. "We're done here," he said. He turned, guiding Lyra and Zara up the ramp into the ship. He felt the hair on his neck prickle as he crossed the threshold, the instinct that had kept him alive more than once, the sense of eyes watching from the dark. He slammed the hatch shut, keyed the lock, and turned toward the cockpit. "Strap in," he told Lyra. She set Zara in the co-pilot's chair, buckling the straps with shaking fingers. Corin dropped into the pilot's seat, firing the engines to life. The ship shuddered as the thrusters kicked, rattling the loose panels overhead. He checked the scanners again. A new ping flickered on the edge of the screen, fast, small, and moving toward them. "Damn it," he hissed, hands flying over the console. "We've got company." Lyra grabbed Zara's hand, pulling the girl close. "Is it him?" Corin didn't answer. He didn't know, but he wasn't waiting to find out. He slammed the throttle forward, engines roaring as the ship lifted from the ground. Outside, through the viewport, he saw three figures sprint into the clearing, one large, broad-shouldered, with a familiar swagger in his gait. RYC. The bastard raised a pistol, firing two bright plasma bursts at the ship's hull. They flared against the shield barrier, cracking the forward deflectors, but not breaching. Corin swung the ship around, engines screaming, and blasted skyward through the narrow dock corridor. "Hold on," he shouted. The ship jolted as a second blast hit the aft shielding, sending a shiver through the hull. Lyra clutched Zara, her eyes wide and terrified, but focused on Corin's face. The radio crackled. A harsh voice, RYC, distorted by static. "You think you can run, human? She belongs to me. I'll find you. I swear it." Corin killed the comm, gritting his teeth. He punched the burned thrusters, clearing the upper dock corridor just as a patrol drone swooped past in a flash of white light. The ship rattled, warning alarms blaring as the old stabilizers buckled under the strain. "Come on," he growled, coaxing the throttle forward. The ship bucked once, then shot free of the dock canyons, the towers falling away beneath them as they climbed into the smog-choked sky. He glanced at Lyra. Her breath came fast, but she was steady, her hands gripping Zara tight. The girl whimpered, burying her face against her mother's shoulder. The comm buzzed again. Tyreek's voice hurried. Dock security flagged a firefight. Patrol might be searching the air lanes. "You're on your own now, Corin. Good luck." Corin shut the comm, jaw set. "We don't need luck," he muttered. Outside, the clouds parted. He saw the thin curve of the planet's upper atmosphere ahead, blue-black and endless. The scanners flickered with new warnings. Security drones patrolling the edge lanes, sweeping for unauthorized launches. Corin checked the fake codes Tyreek had sent. The ship's NAV system beeped an error, clearance denied. He cursed under his breath. Tyreek had lied. They weren't clear yet. He flicked the shield power to double front, diverting from the aft generators. Alarm screamed, but he didn't care. "We're punching through," he said. Lyra clutched Zara tighter, her eyes wide. "Do it," she whispered. Corin angled the nose toward the black, pushed the throttle forward. Outside, red lights flashed as patrol drones zipped past, scanners sweeping the hull. He felt the old ship groan under the strain, the engines rattling so hard the floor shivered beneath his boots. A bright white beam cut across their path, a drone lock. The alarm shrieked. "Hang on," he shouted. He twisted the ship hard, engines screaming, pushing the old freighter past its limits. The hull rattled, bolts clanging loose from overhead panels. One of the drones fired, a burst of bright plasma streaking past the viewport, missing by meters. The sky darkened, stars piercing through the smog. Corin punched the auxiliary thrusters, the ship jolting forward with a bone-rattling lurch. Then they were through, past the last of the patrol grid, the drones spinning off into the dark as the planet fell away behind them. Silence fell in the cockpit, broken only by the hum of the strained engines. Corin slumped back in the chair, breathing hard. He checked the scanners. Clear. Lyra let out a shaking breath. Hugging Zara so tight the girl squeaked in protest. Tears streaked Lyra's dirty cheeks, but her eyes were fierce, locked on Corin. "You did it," she whispered. Corin didn't smile. He didn't feel relief yet, but he let out a slow breath, glancing at the stars beyond the viewport. "We're not safe yet," he said quietly, "but we're free. For now." Behind them, the planet shrank into the distance, a dirty gray marble streaked with smog and flickering lights. Corin gripped the controls, eyes on the endless black ahead. He didn't know where they were going yet, but he knew he'd find them somewhere better, somewhere no one would hurt them again. The hum of the ship's aging engines filled the cockpit, a low tremor vibrating through the metal floor. Corin kept his hands on the controls, eyes locked on the small display showing the flight path ahead. Lyra sat behind him, Zara curled up asleep on her lap. Outside the viewport, the stars drifted past, endless and silent. They had escaped, but the adrenaline hadn't faded. Corin checked the scanners every few minutes, expecting patrol drones to flicker onto the screen, ready to drag them back down into the dirt. Hours passed with no sign of pursuit. Finally, when the ship's internal clock showed they'd been in open space for nearly a full day, he let himself exhale. They were free, at least from RYC, from the port authorities, from the garbage heaps and rusted towers. But freedom didn't mean safety, and Corin knew it. They were low on fuel, with only enough to make one jump before the ship's battered cells went dead. The NAV computer flickered as he punched in coordinates for the closest habitable world, a backwater colony planet called Valen's Reach. He'd heard of it from passing traders, thick forests, high humidity, plenty of cheap land. Hard to find, harder to track anyone once they landed. That was what they needed. He glanced over his shoulder. Lyra was awake, staring out the side viewport with distant eyes. Her face was pale, smudged with old dirt and grease from the engine room. But there was something different in her posture, a tiny spark of relief, like she'd finally allowed herself to believe they might survive. "You holding up?" Corin asked. She blinked, turning to him. "I think so," she whispered. "I keep waiting to hear his voice on the comm, or a knock on the hatch." Corin shook his head. "He's not coming. He can't follow us out here." Zara stirred on her lap, mumbling softly. Lyra smoothed the girl's tangled hair back, humming under her breath. A rough, cracked sound, but gentle. Corin looked away, busying himself with the controls. He wasn't used to this kind of quiet, this strange hum of hope that made his skin itch. The jump was rough. The old freighter rattled, so hard Corin thought the hull might split in two. He watched the NAV screen flicker with static as stars streaked past in long white trails. Then with a hard lurch that nearly threw him from the seat, they dropped out of hyperspace, and the planet filled the viewport. Valen's Reach. It was beautiful in a raw, wild way. Vast green jungles spread across the continents, broken by wide silver rivers. Patches of purple clouds drifted across the sky, casting dark shadows on the dense canopy below. Corin had never seen so much untouched land. Even from orbit, the place looked clean, unscarred by towers or smogstacks. Lyra leaned forward, eyes wide. "It's alive," she whispered. Corin nodded. "Yeah," he said. "It's messy, but it's real." He guided the ship down through the atmosphere, feeling the hull shudder as they punched through the thick purple clouds. Rain splattered the viewport in fast, silvery streaks. Alarms blinked on the console. Power cells near empty, coolant line at 70%. He gritted his teeth and eased the freighter down toward a small landing field on the outskirts of a colonial settlement, little more than scattered buildings clinging to the edge of the endless forest. The ship touched down with a jolt that rattled every bolt in the frame. Corin powered down the engines, staring at the cooling vents as they belched steam into the wet air. His hands trembled on the controls. He forced himself to breathe slow, steady. "Okay," he said. "We made it." Lyra unbuckled, holding Zara close as they stepped down the cargo ramp into warm, damp air. The smell of wet leaves and mud filled Corin's nose. A sharp, earthy scent so different from the sour chemical reek of the city, he almost didn't recognize it. Rain dripped from the ship's hull, splattering into puddles on the soft dirt below. The colony wasn't much, a few prefab shelters scattered along a muddy path, with tangled vines creeping up their walls. A weathered sign flickered by the path, letters in common trade script reading, Valen Outpost, new beginnings here. A tall, broad-shouldered alien stepped out from one of the shelters, blinking big amber eyes at them. Her skin was a soft gray, with dark ridges running along her brow. She wore stained coveralls and held a data pad in one thick-fingered hand. "New arrival?" she rumbled, voice low but not unfriendly. Corin nodded. "Just looking for somewhere quiet to put down for a while," he said. The woman shrugged. "You picked the right place. No patrols come this deep. Rent's cheap. Work's scarce, but no one asks questions. You want a cabin? We've got a few left." Corin felt the last tension ease from his spine. He glanced at Lyra, who clutched Zara close, blinking in the soft rain. "We'll take one," he said. The woman tapped her pad, gestured toward a small metal cabin half hidden behind thick ferns. "Number 4, she said. "Water runs, power flickers sometimes. Don't steal from your neighbors, and they won't slit your throat. Welcome to the jungle." Corin almost smiled. Understood. They moved through the mud, the air thick with insects humming and the low croak of alien frogs hidden in the brush. The cabin was tiny, one room, rusted at the edges, with a small power cell buzzing faintly by the door. But it was dry, and when Corin powered up the interior lights, the dim glow felt like the first good thing he'd seen in years. He set down what little they had. Lyra sank onto the cot, hugging Zara close. The girl was asleep again almost instantly, her tiny hands gripping her mother's shirt. Corin stood in the doorway, staring out at the dripping trees. He felt exhaustion wash over him like a wave, dragging him under. His legs shook with the need to sit, to stop moving, but his mind refused to slow. Lyra's voice was soft behind him. "You saved us," she said. He shook his head. "Not yet," he murmured. "But we've got a chance now." She reached out, touched his wrist. Her skin was warm, damp from the rain. He didn't pull away. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know why you did this, but thank you." Corin turned to her, seeing the fear still in her eyes, but also something else. Trust, hope, the fragile beginnings of belief. He wanted to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. He just nodded, letting the touch linger. Outside, the rain drummed on the metal roof, steady and calm. For the first time since he'd pulled Lyra and Zara out of the trash piles, Corin let himself sit, his body slumping against the wall as every ache and bruise throbbed into life. He closed his eyes, listening to the rain and the soft sound of Zara breathing. They weren't safe forever, but they had tonight. That was enough. The days passed quietly on Valen's reach. Corin fixed the cabin's power lines, patched the leaks in the thin metal roof, and scrounged for spare parts in the settlement's makeshift market. Lyra spent the mornings cleaning the cabin, tending to Zara, and helping Corin strip old wiring from the junk panels they bought cheap from local traders. It wasn't glamorous work, but no one tried to hurt them. No one asked questions, and no one came looking for them. At night, the three of them sat on the rough floor, sharing the bland protein packs Corin bought with barter credits. Sometimes Zara would hum to herself, drawing shaky lines on the old tablet with her rusty stylus. Sometimes Lyra would tell soft, half-finished stories from her childhood, strange tales of glowing forest insects and old machines that ran without power. Corin didn't talk much about his past. He didn't know how to describe the years he'd spent scavenging, the people he'd watched die in alleys, the quiet nights spent staring at the stained ceiling of his ship, wondering why he kept going. But each night, with Zara curled up against Lyra's side and the soft buzz of insects outside their thin walls, the tension in his chest eased a little more. One morning, Corin found Zara sitting by the small workbench he'd set up beside the cabin door. She was turning a broken sensor module over in her hands, peering into the gaps of cracked plastic. When she saw him, she blinked and held it up shyly. "Does this go in the ship?" she asked, voice soft. Corin knelt beside her. "Not anymore," he said, "but you've got a good eye." Zara smiled, small, uncertain but real. Corin ruffled her hair, and this time she didn't flinch away. That night, under the warm hum of the cabin's dim light, Zara whispered something that caught both Corin and Lyra off guard. "Papa," she said, reaching toward Corin with small, tired arms. The word hit him like a punch to the ribs. He froze, staring at the child, at her wide blue eyes blinking up at him. Lyra covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling instantly. Corin swallowed hard. His throat felt raw. He moved closer, pulled Zara gently into his lap, his hands awkward and trembling. "I'm here," he said, voice rough. "I've got you." Lyra let out a shaky breath, brushing tears from her cheeks. She never called him that. She whispered, voice cracking. "Never called him anything, but sir." Corin hugged the child closer. He didn't think he'd ever wanted anything as badly as he wanted to protect that small bundle of warmth in his arms. He glanced at Lyra, who wiped her eyes and leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered again. Over the next weeks, things settled into a routine. Corin picked up small repair jobs around the settlement, patching faulty panels, rerouting power lines, building cheap water pumps from scavenged parts. He bartered for extra rations and simple clothes, rough cloth shirts, old boots for Lyra, and a small patch jacket for Zara. Lyra began smiling more, her steps lighter as they worked together on small tasks. She laughed quietly when Zara tripped over the oversized jacket sleeves, pulling her into a quick hug. Corin found himself watching her when she didn't notice, the curve of her mouth when she grinned, the way she tucked stray strands of crimson hair behind her ear. He caught himself thinking over and over how strange it felt to want something this badly and not be ashamed of it. Late one night, as a purple moon hung low over the treeline and alien insects buzzed in the darkness, Lyra stood at the doorway of the cabin. Corin was wiping grease from his hands, exhausted from a long day patching a water pump at the settlement's main well. She reached for him, fingers brushing the grime on his forearms. Her touch was soft, hesitant, but she didn't pull away. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she whispered. "I thought maybe there was no such thing as safety. No such thing as kindness that didn't cost something." Corin searched her face, reading every flicker of fear and hope in her teal eyes. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "I promise you." She bit her lip, eyes shining. "I need to tell you something," she said, "before I lose the nerve." He stayed silent, letting her speak. "I love you," Lyra whispered, voice trembling. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe it started that day you pulled Zara out of the trash, or the night you stayed up to watch the door while we slept. I was afraid to say it because every time I trusted someone, it turned into pain. But it's real." Corin didn't answer with words. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight he felt the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. She pressed her face into his neck, breathing in short, ragged bursts. "I love you too," he whispered in her hair. I don't know what comes next, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. They stood there in the doorway, the rain starting again in soft sheets that pattered on the metal roof. Lyra tilted her head up, kissed him. It was soft and trembling at first, then deeper, more certain as her hands tangled in his hair. When they finally broke apart, Lyra rested her forehead against his. "We're a family now," she whispered. "I want that. I want it forever." Corin closed his eyes, breathing in the warm scent of rain and old oil and the faint perfume of Lyra's skin. "Forever," he said. Inside, Zara mumbled in her sleep, turning over on the small cot. Corin pulled Lyra close again, feeling the warmth of her body, the small tremor of relief in her breath. Outside, the alien forest hummed with life, the steady thrum of insects and distant croaks rising into the humid night. For the first time in years, Corin believed in tomorrow. He believed they would build something here, something better than the world they'd left behind. He would fix the ship when he had time, maybe take small runs for the settlement, maybe teach Zara how to splice wires or mend old engine cores. He would wake every morning to Lyra's quiet smile and the soft sound of Zara humming to herself as she played by the door. The city was gone. RYC was gone. The bruises and fear still lingered, but they were fading, replaced by something new. They had a home. They had each other. Corin held Lyra's hand as they stepped back inside, shutting the door against the rain. He glanced at Zara, who murmured in her sleep, clutching her old tablet like a talisman. Lyra leaned into him, her cheek brushing his shoulder. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And Corin knew, deep in his bones, that he would fight every day to keep it that way. In the quiet hum of the cabin, under the steady rhythm of the rain, the fear finally faded. They were free. They were together. And that was enough.